Hi everyone. After years of coping with my poisonous family, I'm Kayla, 18F, and at last, I am receiving some justice. My older sister Jessica, 21F, has always been preferred by my parents, Linda, 48F, and Greg, 51M, leaving me feeling like an afterglow in my own house. It's been difficult. I find myself needing to vent at times. Growing up, I was the one that could not seem to do everything right. I started painting, something I was really interested in, at 16 years old. Working for weeks on a painting for a local art competition, I felt good about the finished product. Showing my parents delighted me, since even the little bit of approval would be much appreciated. When I showed my mother, though, she looked at it once and remarked, "Well, that's not exactly a masterpiece, is it?" She then passed it to Jessica, who quickly glanced at it, murmured something half-hearted like, "It's nice," and returned to whatever she was working on. Dad was too absorbed watching one of Jessica's dancing videos to really give it much thought. I felt invisible in many different ways. This was only one. When I was 15 and showed my family my first serious lover, my parents hardly paid attention to him. They made disparaging remarks about his lack of the kind of person they would have expected me to be dating. I was embarrassed when my mother even said he seemed to come from the other side of the tracks. They never gave him a chance. Their rejection of my connection made me feel totally abandoned. Then there was the period I spent days sick with the flu. I was depressed, hardly able to move, yet my folks hardly even bothered me. Helping Jessica with her practice for a school performance kept them too busy. Feeling abandoned, I recall hearing them animatedly discussing her outfit while I lie in bed. Jessica arrived home at last, stuck her head into my room, gave me a pitying look and said, "Hope you're feeling better," then hurried out to hang out with her pals. I felt very alone. Jessica never appeared to give me any thought either. I tried several times to reach her, discussing literature, movies, or whatever we could have in common. She was always too preoccupied in her own world, though, more eager to tell her pals about her most recent exploits than she was in communicating to me. She would just dismiss it if I attempted to be honest about how offended I felt by all the favoritism, calling me theatrical. Mom and Dad love us both. But why was I constantly treated as an afterthought if they loved us both truly? Many times like this, when I felt like a background actor in my own life pass. When I tried telling my parents how I felt, they usually brushed me off, saying I was seeing things or too sensitive. Jessica's successes are just more obvious, they would say. Still, that did not lessen the agony. 2 days ago was my 18th birthday. For background, Jessica's birthday falls before mine. Therefore, you can see how family events have traditionally gone. I always had this awful sensation growing up that hers dominated my birthday. Still, I chose to keep things basic this year. I knew better than a grand party would call for. I asked my parents for a quiet supper at a decent restaurant with a few friends and relatives. I was thrilled about turning 18, finally being an adult. I wanted nothing ostentatious. It seemed like a major turning point, a celebration of a little degree of autonomy. I had been saving a wonderful navy blue dress for this occasion. I even came onto a restaurant everyone would enjoy. A small, comfortable venue with a decent range of cuisine for everybody. I checked everything and informed my mother the supper will start at 7 p.m. She consented, and I thought for once, everything was running well. On my birthday, I excitedly arrived at the restaurant at 6:45. Not wanting to be too early, I waited outside for a little while, hoping my family would show there shortly. Expecting to see them waiting at our booked table, I entered at 7 o'clock, but the restaurant was vacant. No recognizable faces. I sat there uncomfortably waiting after the hostess showed me the elegantly arranged table I had reserved. I informed the server I would like to wait for the others, even though he came over and asked whether I wanted to order now. I kept checking my phone, hoping to see a note from friends or parents complaining of running late. Nothing. By 7:30, it was very evident that none were arriving. The heart sunk. On my 18th birthday, I was sitting by myself dressed for an event that never was scheduled. Embarrassed, I at last phoned my folks. None of it responded. I went to try phoning Jessica. She picked up and nonchalantly said, "Oh, didn't Mom tell you?" when I inquired where everyone was. Dinner was canceled. She wasn't feeling it. I was in shock. They skipped the meal and showed no effort in informing me? When I questioned her why none of anybody had told me, Jessica simply brushed it off. "I suppose I missed. I tried keeping back my emotions, but it was difficult," she remarked in the most apathetic manner, as if it didn't matter that I'd been waiting for almost an hour. I was broke. On my 18th birthday, my own family had totally forgotten about me, more out of habit than hunger. I asked the waiter if I could relocate to a smaller table and ordered a basic dinner. Jessica swiftly hung up, leaving me sitting there in bewilderment. I didn't want to start a scene. Alone, I sat there reading through my phone, trying to divert myself from the extreme melancholy. My grandpa, whom I hadn't even considered would arrive, entered the restaurant just as I thought the night couldn't get much worse. I could scarcely believe my eyes. Given that my family had called off the meal behind my back, I had not anticipated him showing up. But there he was, glancing at me with a kind smile and sparkle in his eye. I felt a flutter of relief for the first time that evening. "Happy birthday, Kayla," he murmured as he walked over to give me a huge embrace. I stayed on him for a bit more than normal, feeling the flood of sensation I had been suppressing all night come upon me. Though I had no clue why he hadn't received the message that the dinner had been canceled, I was so appreciative he was there. He sat across from me and glanced around. "Where's everyone else?" His voice full of anxiety, he questioned. It took just that one basic query for the dam to topple. I started weeping immediately at the table as I could not hold it in anymore. Though I could not help it, I felt ashamed. Between cries, I told him all the disappointment, frustration, and sadness that had been building up finally poured over. I told him about how I had come early, changed, and was thrilled, only to be left seated there alone after spending hours organizing this meal. I told him how I had finally called Jessica only to discover that nobody had even bothered to let me know the meal had been postponed. He sat silently and listened the entire time. His expression grew more austere as I related the events of the evening. When I finished, my grandfather stared at me with a mixture of grief and resentment. "Kayla, I'm so sorry," he stated with real sorrow in his voice. "I never knew the meal was canceled. Knowing would have meant that I would have come right to you, This is incorrect." His comments thus consoled me more than I had thought. Someone else realized how cruelly I had been treated, and that affirmation meant the world to me. I wasn't alone in feeling wounded. As the waiter delivered my lunch, we sat down and my grandfather, always the optimist, made some jokes to attempt to brighten my mood. His presence somewhat made the evening more tolerable, though at least I wasn't totally abandoned. My grandfather insisted on taking me home after we completed dinner, therefore deviating from the birthday party I had planned. Having him at my side helped me feel a bit more courageous, even if I wasn't looking forward meeting my family given all that had gone on. I inhaled deeply as we drew up to the home, getting ready for whatever could lie ahead. I could hear heated voices coming from the living room right away as soon as we entered. My parents were fighting loudly. My grandpa glanced at me, his eyebrows wrinkled in concern, and we both headed toward the sound of the yelling. What we came into was a full-fledged argument between my mother and my grandfather. Apparently, his being there for my birthday meal had started a domino effect. I was very perplexed as my mother was enraged and accused him of interfering with our family problems and ruining everything. How could my grandfather show up for my birthday dinner, something they had omitted to inform him was canceled, cause such a disturbance? It became quite evident as I stood there listening that this debate went beyond my birthday. Apparently, my mother had been depending on the hope that my grandfather would give her his house according will. But suddenly, seeing how my parents had been treating me, my grandfather had changed his mind. She was enraged. He was thinking twice about leaving the home to her. "Dad, I have done everything for this family." My mother yelled, said, "How could you turn on me this way? You pledged the house to me." Always calm, but obviously offended. My grandfather answered, "Linda, I promised to look after my family. And that covers Kayla as well. Your treatment of her is reprehensible." Hearing those comments caused me an odd variety of feelings. Although the way my family had treated me still hurt, on the other hand, it seemed like someone was finally defending me and seeing that my feelings were reasonable. But my mom wasn't having it. "You're exactly like her," she snapped, her voice rising yet higher, "always making me seem to be the evil man. I have really loved and supported this family. Not sure what to say or do, I stopped still at the doorway. Feeling both thankfulness and grief all at once, I watched him depart. The instant my grandfather departed, my mom focused her wrath on me. "What did you tell him, Kayla? He had spoken up for me, and even though the issue was more convoluted than I had anticipated, I knew he was attempting to protect me," she insisted, her eyes ablaze with rage. I was shocked, my voice quivering. "I told him nothing. I just let him know what occurred, that nobody informed me the dinner was canceled." My mother's expression went angry, but before she could say anything further, I turned and headed for my room. I lacked the will to confront her, and I most definitely wouldn't have defended myself when I hadn't done anything wrong. Closing the door behind me, I lay on my bed trying to make sense of all that had transpired while still hearing my parents argue loudly below. My family had totally missed my birthday, called off the meal without notifying me, and now everything had gone out of hand since my grandfather had showed up. The next morning, the home was tight. I couldn't help but sense that there was something far deeper going on, something I didn't quite grasp, not only about my birthday. Jessica seemed as though nothing had occurred at all while my parents were not interacting with me. Walking downstairs, I discovered the home had been completely changed. Decorations were all about, and the air smelled delicious. It was as though overnight the emphasis had turned totally to Jessica's birthday. Though for Jessica's 21st they were pulling out all the stops, my 18th birthday had been an afterthought and hurt more than I could put into words. Unable to remain in my house anymore, I felt like a ghost invisible to the ones most likely to be looking out for me. I departed with a little bag and directly to the house of my best buddy. I had to be somewhere I felt appreciated, somewhere I wasn't treated as though I didn't count. The oddest aspect is that my buddy greeted me with wide arms, and for the first time in days, I felt a little calm. Not even did my parents phone to see how I was doing. No book, no contact inquiring about my whereabouts or motivation for leaving. That insight struck me more strongly than anything else, as it seemed as though my absence had no relevance to them at all. Not only did they cancel my birthday dinner, but they also showed no regard. Now, sitting at my friend's house, I'm not sure what to do going forward. I'm angry, confused, and wounded. From this, how can I mend? When it feels like the individuals meant to love me the most don't care at all, how should I proceed? The whole birthday dinner debacle was a few weeks ago, and things haven't exactly improved at home. As it happens, things have gone bad. After I left, I stayed with a best friend for a few nights. When I returned home, the tension was much more evident. When I went through the door, it felt like I was an unwelcome visitor in my own house. My parents hadn't contacted me while I was away either. Of course, Jessica was reveling in the aftermath of her big birthday celebration. My 18th birthday appeared to have never happened. For a time, I just kept my head down, avoiding conflict. I knew I wouldn't have the stamina for any engagement with my parents, particularly with my mother, as it most likely would lead to an argument. Getting things ready before I moved out and getting ready for college occupied me. That wasn't meant to be. It all came to a head over something as ordinary as the dishes. I figured I could simply make it through the next few weeks and then leave and start over. One evening I hadn't gotten around to cleaning them straight after supper. Honestly, I had been preoccupied with college prep, form filling, and phone calls. It simply escaped me. I reasoned I would do them before bed. But before I got the opportunity, my mother angrily burst into my room saying, "You think you can simply leave your filth for someone else to clean?" She snapped and stood in the doorway, crossing her arms. "Kayla, you really are not appreciative. You never participate around here." Her rapid escalation of the matter surprised me. Trying to keep composure, "Mom, I was going to do the dishes before bed," I said. She was not hearing any of it, yet I had simply been somewhat occupied with college matters. She persisted in talking about how I was lazy and selfish, how I never cleaned the home. My patience was thin right then. She was blowing out over something as little as the dishes after I had been treading on eggshells for weeks. "Really? You are labeling me as lazy?" I fired back, at last cracking. "What about all I have been doing to get ready for college? What about your cancellation of my birthday meal without even informing me? You think I'm the issue? I've been treated like an afterthought in this house for years, Dot." And that was all. Years of storing all the frustration I had been carrying spilled out. I told her everything, How sad I was, how disregarded I had felt, how Jessica had always been the favored. My mother's face flushed red with wrath, and her voice rose even louder as I told her how she hadn't even noticed when I left for days without a word, and how it hurt my heart that she didn't even care enough to show up on my 18th birthday. "Oh, so now you are portraying the victim?" she cried out. "You believe you are the only one experiencing difficult circumstances? You are lucky. We have even allowed you to remain here for a considerable while. Given your unhappiness, perhaps you need to just go." I looked at her in shock. She kicked me out? Over several dishes? Still, I knew it went beyond the dishes. Years of bitterness, of being overlooked, of never being seen or heard. This was the pinnacle of everything. And now it had boiled over. I turned without another word and reached for a bag. I went toward the door with some basics: clothes, my laptop, the few personal belongings I couldn't leave behind. Not trying to stop me was my mother. She only remained there, boiling, as I left. I never even bid farewell. One more debate, one more attempt to defend myself was beyond me for lack of vitality. I finished it. I left the house directly to go to see my best buddy. Explaining what had occurred, I phoned her on the way, and fortunately she was more than ready to let me stay with her once more. Once I went to her friend's house, I felt an odd sensation of comfort. Her house had started to be my haven. Though I knew one thing: I was not returning to that house, not entirely knowing what the next step would be, not until absolutely necessary. A few days went by, and I still hadn't heard from my folks. Being booted out over something so small seemed strange, yet at the same time it was nearly a relief. Living in that poisonous atmosphere, where every smallest action may set off an explosion, weary me. Though I had already been preparing to head out for college in a few weeks, now I had to decide what to do in the interim. Not long before my grandfather discovered what had transpired. I hadn't called him straight away immediately, as I wanted to save him additional family strife. But then I felt I had to tell him. He became enraged when I called him and told him I had been expelled. "I can't believe they did this to you," my grandfather remarked, his voice full of worry and wrath. "I was livid that I hadn't reached out to him sooner for help." My mother had gone so far as to toss me out of the house over dishes. "You should not have to go through this by yourself, Kayla." Hearing those words was a great comfort. "I'm coming over and we will work this out together." In all of this, I had felt so alone, yet knowing my grandfather was on my side gave me the will to stay on. He agreed to accompany me to assist me pack for college at my parents' house in a few days. In the interim, I stayed at a friend's house trying to concentrate on getting ready for college and figuring out my next moves. He wanted to make sure I wouldn't have to confront things on my own, and that meant the world to me. Not to consider what had transpired, though, was difficult. Every time I allowed my mind go, I experienced both despair and rage. How could my own family regard me in this manner? How could they evict me without thinking twice, as like I didn't count? One thing, though, I knew for sure: I would not allow this define me. The day at last arrived for me to return to my parents' house with my grandfather. I had a future to look forward to. I was not going to allow their actions stop me. Though I was anxious, having him at my side provided the fortitude I needed. We would walk in, choose my stuff for college, and head out. It was a straightforward approach. I wanted no more drama, and I most definitely wanted no more arguments with my parents or sister. I simply wanted to go on. My stomach started to turn over with nervousness as we drove up to the home. Since the night I left, I had not seen or talked with my parents. The idea of seeing them once more after all that had transpired had my heart racing. Given his comforting grasp of my hand as we stepped out of the car, my grandfather must have noticed my discomfort. "Don't worry, Kayla," he added. "We will be in and out of there. Your complete future is still to be written. Thank you. This is merely the last stage before you may at least go forward." We went up to the door, and I inhaled deeply before walking inside. The home was absolutely quiet as we came inside. Instead of the stillness hanging thick in the air, I half expected my mom or dad to come storming out to start another fight. Almost all of my stuff vanished when I opened the door to my room, so my grandfather and I rushed straight to get ready to go as fast as we could. My clothing, my books, my personal belongings, everything I had lived with for the preceding 18 years vanished. All that remained were a few notebooks and some vintage school supplies. I stood there stunned. trying to make sense of what I was witnessing as if my life had been deleted from that house. Like me, my grandfather seemed very shocked. "Where is all your stuff, Kayla?" His voice full of incredulity, he questioned, not sure what to say. As the truth of the matter sank in me, I developed a lump in my throat. My parents had gone one step farther, not just booted me out. As though I never existed, they had thrown away or given everything. My grandfather was furious. "We have to speak with them," he continued, his voice shaking with rage. "This is absolutely unacceptable." We marched downstairs and saw my parents sitting in the living room, appearing utterly unconcerned. As I confronted them, I could feel the wrath boiling up inside me. "What happened to my stuff?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. My mom glanced up at me and grinned. She responded nonchalantly, "Oh, we figured you wouldn't need any of it anymore." "Are you soon departing for college?" What I was hearing seemed unbelievable. They had disposed of everything, including my memories and personal possessions, like it was nothing, and they lacked even the courtesy to inform me. My dad interrupted, laughing as though the entire affair were a joke. "Kayla, think of it as a fresh start. You need to be thanking us." I was shivering with fury. "How could you go about this? These were my belongings. You have no right to touch those." The amused twist of my mother's face suggested that my suffering might be laughed at. "We are free to do as we choose, Kayla. That is our residence, after all." That served as the last strike. I felt as though I had been totally disrespectfully ignored and hit in the belly. My tears came out uncontrollably at last. Seeing the situation I was in, my grandfather moved closer and stated, "You two are unbelievable," with a chilly, under-control voice. "You have Kayla as your daughter. Given this, how would you treat her?" My parents, though, showed little interest. Realizing there was nothing else to say, my grandfather gently grabbed my elbow and walked me back outside. They sat there, haughty and uncritical, watching me break down as if it were some kind of amusement. I was too offended to talk, and as we got into the car, the tears continued to flow. Like I had been deprived of, not just my possessions, but also my dignity and sense of self. My grandfather, as usual, was a rock. I felt completely demoralized. "Kayla, I'm so sorry you had to go through that," he remarked gently, his voice full of compassion. "You don't deserve any of this." We drove in quiet for some time, and I let myself scream it out. When we returned to my grandfather's house, he made sure I was taken care of. I was grieving the family I thought I had, the affection I had never had, and the final reality that my parents would never change. I would always have a place with him, he assured me, regardless of what. He went shopping for everything I would need for college so I could start to get on my feet. Choosing fresh clothing, supplies, and personal stuff to replace the ones I had lost seemed odd. But I appreciated his generosity. In the days that followed, I also depended on my closest buddy. He even helped me acquire a few things that reminded me of home. Things that would help root my new existence at college. She helped me get ready for college, gave me clothing, and continuously reminded me I wasn't alone. I felt more supported between her and my grandfather than I had ever felt in my house. A few weeks later, I headed to college. They were my actual family, the ones who really cared. I felt a weird sense of liberation instead of being depressed about having to leave everything behind. For the first time in years, the continual burden of living in a poisonous environment did not pull me down. My parents hardly bothered to say goodbye. I was beginning anew and understood it was the best thing for me even if it wasn't easy. I did not anticipate them doing so. Having not talked since the day I left, to be honest, I no longer needed them in my life. As I adjusted to college life, I started to heal. Family is defined by the people who love and support you unconditionally, not by blood. Though it took more than one night, I discovered calm bit by bit. I concentrated on my academics, developed new friendships, and began to create the life I had always desired for myself. Regular check-ins with my granddad followed by vacation and break visits. Looking back, I still feel the hurt of all that transpired with my family. My best friend stayed a regular presence in my life, always available when I needed her. Still, I feel more robust as well. Now I know I deserve more than what they handed me. I am due love, worth, and respect. And while I may have lost my parents in the process, I gained something far more valuable, a sense of self-worth and the knowledge that I could build my own family with the people who really care about me. And that, I realize, is the best birthday present I could have ever hoped for.